Hi guys, so I'm here to tell you guys how to learn to do your prose analysis essays. These ones on top of the poetry ones are probably the hardest to do because you have to actually read the passage. Now, a lot of these suggestions have been to basically not read the entire prose piece and just pull pieces that you need out of, but I believe if you skim enough, then you should be able to get both done in your time limit and you should be fine. So here we go. So question 2, it says read the passage below and write an essay discussing how the characterization of the passage reflects the narrator's attitude towards Mctug, or Tague, however you pronounce that. In your essay, consider such elements such as diction, tone, detail, and syntax. So basically, if you don't have any of this in your essay, you're going to fail. So the key parts there are characterization of the passage, reflects the narrator's attitude towards the character, and diction, tone, detail, and syntax. If you don't use these literary terms in your essay, you will probably fail. Just saying. So coming down here, one day in San Francisco had come the news of his mother's death. She left him with some money, not much, but enough to set him up in business. So he cut loose from the charlatan and opened his dental parlors on Polk Street and Accommodation Street of small shops in residence quarter town. Now, by this point, I would probably skip most of this because it really doesn't discuss Mctug, or however you pronounce his name, until right about here. So I would skip most of this. You can go back and read it if you need to for support. But I would say start right here because that's when the mention of him begins. And any extra fluff that isn't discussed on how the narrator feels about this character, don't read it because it's not worth it. So for Mctug, it was a young giant carrying his huge shock for blonde hair 6 feet 3 inches from the ground, moving his immense limbs and heavy with ropes of muscles slowly, ponderously. So that automatically goes to detail because that's a lot of detail to do, and also syntax for the word choice. So that sentence right here, you can definitely use in your essay, like little bits like moving his immense limbs, incorporating the small quotes like Mr. Harris has been suggesting for a long, long time. Also down here, his mind was as his body, heavy, slow, and to act sluggish. So that's another that's a good diction and also somewhat tone because of the, heavy, slow, sluggish, gets you feeling down kind of thing. Made to do with the bedroom as well, sleeping on the big bed lounge against the wall opposite the room. Also good for detail. Then come over here. This is pretty much useless because there's no mention of him until right about here. On the top shelf, Mctug, or however you pronounce his name, kept his concertina and a bag of birdseed for the canary. Now that's another, probably a throwaway sentence if I'm to be honest, but it could go with like detail and tone into his character. Another one, but for one thing, Mctug would have been perfectly contented And just outside his window was his signboard, a modest affair that read, Dr. Mataug, Dental Parlors, Gas Given. And that was all. That's another good one for like the syntax and diction and all those things. But mostly I would focus on this sentence right here. Excuse me. Sorry about that. And this one right here. And this one right here. And even this last sentence right here, which I didn't get to reading. And this sentence right here. Those are really good for diction and tone and syntax. And this one would be a good one if you wanted to add a little bit about sleeping in the bed lounge against the wall at the opposite of the room. So at this point, it's been about 6 minutes into the whole thing. You probably are not talking to yourself, so it probably has been a shorter time. So basically, you've read this entire thing that all you need to know about the characterization of the passage that reflects the narrator's attitude towards McTague, and you have considered the elements of diction, tone, detail, and syntax. So at this point, you're looking pretty good. Then we move over here to the essays. Now, typically these essays are set up to have the first one be the best, second one the middle, and the third one be the worst. This, out of all of the questions in the 2005 Form B, had the best scores, as you can see right here. This one got a 9, which is a perfect score. This one got a 7, and this is the only one that didn't pass. This one right here for the poetry just barely passed, didn't pass at all. Just barely passed and didn't pass at all. So this one actually did the best because it's probably a more open to interpretation question. But I can't go into the poetry in reform because that's not my job. My job is the prose. So as we can see here, probably none of you can read this, neither can I, honestly. But, yeah, it's terrible handwriting. But what he's got here is, in the prose passage above, the narrator makes his or her pity of McTaug evident through tone, which in turn furthered the juxtaposition and his strength and his stupidity. Details of his professional failure explain the reason for such pity, and syntax furthers the juxtaposition mentioned. So, Mr. Harris's favorite word is in here not once, but twice. He uses a lot of literary terms in this first passage, which is really, really good if you want to get on the people's good side. Throw a lot of literary terms into the first intro paragraph, and they will, like, get hooked immediately because they're like, oh my gosh! Like, I have not seen I've been going through essays all day and have not seen one single mention of a literary term, or if I have, it's like towards the end when they're wrapping it all up. But this one just comes right out and says juxtaposition, tone, syntax, more juxtaposition, you know, all of these literary terms that Mr. Harris loves. You come down here, throughout, it becomes, and I'm not going to try and read most of the rest of this, but he includes like sluggish and stupid and obedient, you know, what we noticed in the other part in the actual thing. He uses the word diction, such as enormous, immense, salient, though his scratching out of his words is a little excessive. He makes up for it in his writing, or her writing, but I'm assuming it's a him, because, you know, this handwriting. But you only need one line through, just so you're all aware, for future reference. Then we come down here, and it talks about, and notice how throughout this entire thing he includes like little quotes. He doesn't have like a full sentence in here to cover up, you know, bad writing kind of thing. And he just has little quotes throughout that further it. And it's like, syntax serves to further the contrast between what McTague is and is not. So those are two ises, but it works okay because it's capable of doing. Because with the syntax further serves the contrast between what, that's a good first sentence. It's probably not the best that he has, but it's pretty good, even though it has the ises in it, which we try to avoid. But it's not terrible to have them in there. And he even like discusses the semicolons that intervene and like all the commas that show up. Like that's going into really fine detail about the passage. And if you're a really fast writer, then I suggest you take your time and like really look over the passage and take in every little detail, so that if you need those details, you have them. If you're not a very fast writer like me, and you're down to the wire at the very end, and you can barely come up with a conclusion by the time the clock runs out, then I suggest take out the little bits and pieces that I showed you earlier, and deal with those first. Okay, so the second essay here is slightly better handwriting, but, you know, not as great as, you know, some other people's handwriting. So this one is with an almost cruelly indifferent tone. The author uses structure, setting, and metaphor to describe McTague as a simple man of simple background with simple ambitions. By refusing to deliver to outright opinion of McTague, the author does not speak ill of him, but by not praising him for his honest intentions and good works, he defines McTague as unsatisfactory. Now, this one has a lot of the fancy language that Mr. Harris talked about a little while ago, where like it's good to have these descriptive words, but when you use cruelly indifferent tone in your very first sentence, you're pretty much just trying to show off, and the judges can see that. So try not to do that as much as possible. It's good to throw out the words when they're like needed, but try not to do too much of that, because then they're just going to be like, oh, well, they're just showing off, so probably not a good idea to, you know, give them a good score. Then, also we see here they're using the little quotes and all such things. This one's using slightly bigger quotes rather than incorporating them into their sentences. And they use... There's a few spelling errors in here, like peace, that kind of just tears at the eyeballs just a little bit. But overall, this isn't a terrible essay. By subtly refusing to acknowledge McTague's and my admirable pursuit of an honest, hard, worthy existence. That probably should have had commas there. The author clearly illustrates his disdain for this simple man and his simple dreams. That's like 4 simples in just the introductory and the conclusion alone. I didn't even look at like the entire middle section for simples. That's a lot of simples, and you're probably not a good idea to stick with simples. So in the next video, I'm going to go over the last one, and then we're going to discuss how the judges graded them and why. And so I'm going to